Welcome to the 6th BSAT online talk sponsored by Rowntree Tryon. Again, I'd like to thank Jamie Rowntree for his generous support. It means that we can get these talks to a wider audience as part of our central remit, which is to promote all aspects of sporting art to a wider audience. We started this series as a substitute for our programme of visits, which we had to suspend because of the plague. Following the success of this series, we're planning to extend the programme beyond March next year. Today, I would like to welcome Imogen Gibbon, the Deputy Director and Chief Curator of Portraiture at the National Galleries of Scotland. She is entitled her talk, Painting Games, Sporting Art Highlights from the National Galleries of Scotland. Imogen studied at both the Universities of St Andrews and Aberystwyth. She began her career as a curator at the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich and then moved to Scotland and took up her current role in 2013 after 11 years as a senior curator of the reference section of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. She's curated numerous portraiture exhibitions at the National Galleries on a variety of themes, including sport, medicine, engineering, architecture, science, the portrait bust, and self-portraiture. A real polymath. And she's a real enthusiast for sporting artists and a frequent blogger on the subject. She's a trustee of the Hockey Museum, a member of the judging panel for the Scottish Portrait Awards, and sits on the judging panel of the Lord Aberdare Literary Prize for the British Society of Sports History. She's also an active buyer of sporting art, having recently bought The Lacrosse Girl by John Fry Bourne. And she was alerted to the picture by her old PE teacher, so she maintains the link to active sport as well. Imogen has agreed to answer questions at the end of the talk. If you have a question, the procedure is to use the Q&A button, which you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen. What you do is then type in a question there, and this can be done throughout the talk. I will see the questions as they come in, and we'll be able to put them to Imogen at the end of the session. So, without much ado, over to Imogen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Bear with me while I share my screen for you all. Here we go. So many images on it, it takes a while to load. Should be there in a minute. That's great. Let's get it into play mode. Brilliant. Thank you. Well, Tim, Sally, thank you very much. And thank you to the British Sporting Art Trust for inviting me to speak today, and also to the Rowntree Tryon Gallery for their support of this series of online talks. I'm truly delighted to be sharing with you one of my favourite topics, sport as represented in art. And I'm just sorry that my Lacrosse Girl painting doesn't form the backdrop for you today. It's currently away at a conservation studio, having restoration work being carried out on it. So maybe the next time we meet, we might be able to look at that painting together. The title of my presentation today is Painting Games, Sporting Art Highlights from the National Galleries of Scotland. I'm going to take you on a whistle-stop tour of a selection of perhaps lesser known sports-related artworks from the National Galleries of Scotland collection, hereafter referred to as the NGS collection. I hope to demonstrate that this subject area forms a thriving and active strand of collection development and is key to engaging audiences with Scotland's sporting heritage. The NGS collection is displayed across 3 sites in Edinburgh: the Scottish National Gallery on the left, the Scottish National Portrait Gallery on the top right, and the Scottish National Gallery of Modern Art. Hence, we have a rich and varied collection of artworks on a sporting theme ranging from the 17th to the 21st centuries. At the last count, the NGS collection includes not far short of 1,000 sporting-related artworks, including paintings, sculptures, drawings, prints, time-based media, and photographs. NGS were delighted to lend 4 paintings to the 2016 reopening exhibition at the National Horse Racing Museum, in the Fred Packard Galleries of British Sporting Art in Palace House. And you can see these 4 paintings here on this slide. At the bottom left, we have A Meet of the Five Hounds by Sir Francis Grant, painted in 1833, set near Falkland with the Lomond Hills visible on the left. Grant's hunting paintings have been described as informal, relaxed and intimate without any particular glamour. Top left, we have The Golfers by Charles Lees, completed in 1847, or to give the painting its very full title, The Golfers, a grand match played over the links of St Andrews on the day of the annual meeting of the Royal and Ancient Golf Club. And this painting is often also on display at the R&A World Golf Museum in St Andrews. Top right, we have William, John and Eliza Middleton, the children of the merchant John Middleton, later of Kinfauns Castle in Perthshire, playing croquet, by William Crawford, painted in 1864. Formal competitive croquet in Scotland began 6 years later in 1870, when the first Scottish Croquet Championship was held. And lastly, a portrait of former track cyclist Sir Chris Hoy by Jennifer McRae. This painting was commissioned by the National Galleries of Scotland and painted in 2012. McRae's triptych embodies Hoy's triple success at the 2008 Beijing Olympics in the individual sprint, the team sprint and the keirin. And the sittings for this portrait took place at the Manchester Velodrome in, of all places, a Broome store cupboard, as it had the most suitable provision of natural light coming in through a window and a skylight. I remember well my trip to Newmarket to be present for the installation of these works and watching the nerve-wracking manoeuvring of the largest of these paintings, The Golfers, which measures 170 centimetres high by over 2.5 metres wide, up the staircase and into the galleries. Before looking at a number of works in detail, over the next 3 slides, I'll share some artworks to give you a flavour of the scope of the sporting subject matter represented in the NGS collection. On the top left is a watercolour portrait of Jon Keith Faulkner, who was born in 1856 and died in 1887. He was 3rd son of the 8th Earl of Kintore and a cyclist, Arabic academic and missionary. The watercolour by Edward Clifford, who was a follower of the pre-Raphaelite painter Edward Burne-Jones, was made in the mid-1870s and shows Keith Faulkner in his University of Cambridge vest as the champion cyclist of Great Britain, and I quote, "unbeatable over short and 50-mile distances, racing against amateur and professionals." On the bottom left is Highland Games at Holland Park, London, by, so far, an unknown artist. This painting records the Highland Games held in 1849 in Holland Park by the Scottish Society of London. Queen Victoria, Prince Albert and 3 of their children are shown arriving in the royal carriage. Victoria and Albert attended their first Highland Games at Lochlegan in 1847. The attendance of the royal family ensured the popularity of Highland gatherings, and in 1859, the Braemar Highland Society was invited to hold its annual event at Balmoral. Top right is Game of Tennis Luxembourg Gardens by Samuel John Peploe, painted in about 1906. One of the 4 Scottish colourist painters, S.J. Peploe had a lifelong love of France and made regular visits there from 1904, painting on the Channel coast and in Paris. This small painting only measures around 16 by 24 centimetres and depicts a sun-dappled game of tennis being played in the Luxembourg Gardens in Paris. Bottom right, something completely different, is a painting entitled Just Another Bloody Saturday by Peter Howson, painted in 1987. While not portraying a specific match, the painting recalls the rivalry between Rangers and Celtic, the battle on the pitch mirroring the territorial struggle taking place on the terraces. Just a few more examples, just to continue to demonstrate the scope of artworks in the collection. So here we have at the top in the middle is a hand-coloured aquatint complete with silk fabric depicting John Anderson by Isaac Robert Cruikshank, published in 1821. The celebrated falconer John Anderson is shown here in the costume he wore at the coronation of George IV in 1821. When he presented the king with a pair of falcons on behalf of the 4th Duke of Atholl. As governor of the Isle of Man, the Duke presented the monarch with 2 falcons on coronation day. and you can just make out the emblem of the Isle of Man on Anderson's left sleeve. Towards the bottom is The Curlers by Sir George Harvey, painted in 1835. The painting depicts a traditional inter-parish curling contest, or Bonspiel, at which competitors from the whole spectrum of rural society came together to play the game. The action is frozen during an exciting passage of play, and I think even you can just about make out even the dog in the painting is absolutely wrapped by the passage of the curling stone along the ice. Several copies of the painting were made, and the original version seen here was engraved. Prints were sold in large numbers, whilst individual details from the painting featured on medals struck for a number of regional curling clubs. Top left, or rather, should I say, on the left, is A Lady on Roller Skates, a pen sketch by Joseph Crawhall, drawn in about 1900. Roller skating in purpose-built indoor rinks became a popular pastime in the 1870s. In this drawing, a roller skater glides gently on her skates, her full skirt just about allowing ease of movement. The artist has embellished the garment with a pattern of zodiacal signs, 4 of which can be seen clearly: Pisces, Capricorn, Cancer, and Aries. The last image is The Regatta by Stanley Cursiter, painted in 1913. Local regattas with a fixed programme of boating races became major sporting spectacles from the 1830s. Here, Cursiter is experimenting with the Italian futurist style in this painting of a regatta. His use of abstract and figurative shapes, broken colour, and large areas of flat colour has produced a dynamic composition in which we are given a participant's viewpoint rather than that of a shoreside spectator. In 2018, the National Galleries of Scotland and the National Library of Scotland came together to acquire for the nation the Mackinnon Collection of Scottish Photography. The collection comprises around 15,000 photographs amassed by the collector Murray Mackinnon and represents Scottish life from the 1840s through to the 1940s. And here are 2 of my favourite examples of sports photography from this collection. On the left is a photograph of a women's football match in Edinburgh from the late 1930s between Edinburgh City Girls FC and Rutherglen Women's FC. And on the right is a photograph titled Tournament Gullen Golf Club, the First Tee, showing one of the competitors teeing off at the Scottish Ladies Golf Championships at Gullen in East Lothian in 1925. Now, moving on to some more detailed case studies. I'm going to begin by looking at the history of another painting by the artist of the golfers, Charles Lees, titled The Grand Match of the Royal Caledonian Curling Club at Linlithgow, 1848, painted in 1849 and seen here on the left. The painting is on loan to the National Galleries of Scotland from the Royal Caledonian Curling Club, the governing body for the sport in Scotland, which now trades under the name Scottish Curling. Charles Lees was born in 1800 in Cooper in Fife and died in 1880. And you can see a rather, I don't know what I'd describe it as, quite a moody photograph of Lees here on the right. Lees trained with Sir Henry Raeburn in Edinburgh and also spent 6 months studying in Rome. On his return to Edinburgh, he established himself as a portrait painter. From the 1840s, he turned his attention to painting sporting subjects, particularly typically Scottish sports, including shinty, curling, and golf. The Grand Match painting depicts the famous annual encounter between 35 curling rinks from the north of Scotland and 35 rinks from the south of Scotland, essentially curlers from the north and south sides of the River Forth. And the Grand Match is taking place on Queen Mary's Loch Linlithgow on the 25th of January, 1848. 47 portraits of distinguished curlers of the time were included, and a key was produced to accompany the painting and prints which were subsequently made after the painting. 6,000 spectators were reported to have been present at this 1848 Grand Match, an indication of the importance of the new railway network in creating a mass audience for sport. A contemporary reference to this match reveals the ancient borough of Linlithgow has its name emblazoned on many a stirring page of history and has witnessed many gala days in the merry times of old, but we are much mistaken if, in time coming, the victory and defeat of the 25th of January 1848 be not treasured up in the recollection of the curlers of Scotland as the most memorable event associated with that interesting locality. In the 1840s, curling was described as a game of science demanding an accurate eye and a steady hand, and a pastime in which men of every station and opinion might mingle freely and happily together, animated by no feeling of hostility beyond that of a generous emulation as to who shall get nearest the tee. In the middle of the 19th century, roughly half of the sports clubs in Scotland were curling clubs. And at this time, the game was being played as far north as Aberdare, but wasn't played in the Highlands until the 1870s. The Reverend John Kerr, in his History of Curling and 50 Years of the Royal Caledonian Curling Club, published in 1890, places this painting at the very centre of curling heritage, and declared that a number of the curlers depicted acted as a living link between the ancient and the modern game. Kerr was referring to the founding of the Royal Caledonian Curling Club in 1838, as many of those founding members are represented in the painting. From 1838, the club shaped the nation's indigenous sport into an organised and regulated game. And of course, this painting dates from the mid-19th century, the very time at which newly formed national sports bodies were introducing sporting codes with standardised rules, with their aims being to promote their game, encourage participation, organise regular competitions, standardise equipment, and improve skills. The painting has more or less throughout its life remained within the ownership of the curling world. Soon after the painting was finished in 1853, it was bought from the artist, Charles Lees, by John Piper. Piper was a clothier and creator of the earliest Royal Caledonian Club uniform. He used the painting as part of his advertising campaign to entice curlers into his Edinburgh Southbridge warehouse to inspect the uniform, and Piper also commissioned an engraving of the painting. Thereafter, the painting passed through various hands, but by 1880 was owned by Charles Cowan, one of the founders of the Royal Caledonian Curling Club. One of the next owners was James Law, proprietor of the Scotsman newspaper, from whom in 1898 it was bought by the Royal Caledonian Curling Club. The club's AGM in that year noted, "This historical picture has now found its proper home, and as an heirloom it will become more valuable as the years pass by, which separate curlers from the fathers of the club." So here we have again a formal statement detailing the painting as an invaluable and crucial part of curling history and heritage. The painting has remained with the RCCC ever since, often forming the backdrop for the club's business. Here on the left, and you can be forgiven for not quite making this out, but I think we can just make out the painting hanging in the bar at the Central Scotland ice rink in Perth in 1958, where it hung for around 40 years. And on the right, in the RCCC Edinburgh offices in 1986. In 2014, the painting was saved from being sold and potentially lost to the nation due to the Royal Caledonian Curling Club's appeal to raise a large amount of money for the conservation of the painting. After the painting was conserved, it came on loan to the National Galleries of Scotland. So how did we go about announcing this fact and presenting the painting to our audiences? Well, we invited Michael Goodfellow, a member of the Team GB Olympic men's curling team who won the silver medal at the 2014 Sochi Winter Games, to come and join us for a weekend afternoon of indoor curling in the Great Hall of the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. And here are some images from that event. In the slide towards the bottom, you can see Michael preparing, or should I say pretending to prepare, to deliver a 19th century curling stone across the floor of one of the Portrait Gallery's exhibition spaces in front of the Charles Lees painting. We partnered with the RCCC to deliver this activity, and it was an interesting example of a partnership between a sporting governing body and a national art collection. I was lucky enough when, of course, all the children had experienced the afternoon to try on Michael's Olympic medal, which really was quite something, hence my rather strange facial expression here. So now moving on to another traditional Scottish game, shinty. This painting is called Highland Landscape with a Game of Shinty, and it's attributed to Daniel Cunliffe or A. Smith of Mauchlin, painted in about 1840. It depicts a game of shinty, most probably on the Cluny estate near Newton Moor. Sticks or cammons are raised in frenzied action. The presence of pipers, dancers, and refreshments implies that the match is a festival game, probably taking place at New Year. It's been described by the Cammanacht Association, the world governing body for the sport of shinty, as the most famous depiction of the world celebrated Scottish sport and one of the treasures of the game. The painting disappeared from public view soon after its appearance in 1962 in the exhibition Sport in Scotland at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, when it was on loan from a private collection. As part of researching artworks for the 2011 Scottish National Portrait Gallery exhibition, Playing for Scotland, The Making of Modern Sport, we were trying to discover, or rediscover rather, the whereabouts of this painting. After a 3-year search, which included much detective work, sometimes the favourite part of my job, including a letter about the hunt for the painting being published in Country Life magazine. We eventually located the painting in 2015, and it's now on loan to the National Galleries of Scotland. To celebrate the rediscovery and display of the painting in public for the first time in over 50 years, we teamed up with broadcaster, author, shinty historian and sports history academic Hugh Dan McLennan, and invited the board of the Cammanacht Association and also Parkside Gaelic Primary School in Edinburgh to attend a press call with their shinty sticks, a risky event in the presence of the painting's owner. The importance of this painting as an iconic image of shinty is illustrated by Hugh Dan McLennan's description of the painting as the closest equivalent we've had in shinty to the Holy Grail. Now, moving on to athletics. This is one of my favourite portraits in the collection, and there's a really interesting story about the acquisition of it by the National Galleries of Scotland. The portrait depicts, of course, the Olympic athlete and missionary Eric Liddell. Liddell famously didn't run in his favoured event, the 100 metres at the Paris Olympics in 1924, as the heats were on a Sunday, although he went on to win the gold medal in the 400 metres, as depicted in the 1981 Academy Award-winning film Chariots of Fire. This portrait is by Eileen Soper, who was born in 1905 and died in 1990. She became well known from a young age, actually, as a wildlife artist, and went on to write several books for children, produced a series of natural history books, and was a founder member of the Society of Wildlife Artists. And she's perhaps best known today as an illustrator for Enid Blyton. This is the only existing painted portrait that we know of Eric Liddell. Soper, aged only 20 when she painted this portrait, and already a well-known illustrator and printmaker, depicts Liddell not as an athlete or rugby player. He won 7 caps for Scotland in the early 1920s, but suited, altogether not altogether as serious as a boardroom portrait, with a hint of a smile around the mouth and eyes looking up from a letter as if in contemplation. It was painted in 1925, a year after his triumph in the 400 metres. 1925 was also the year of Liddell's last appearance on the athletics track on British soil at Hampden Park in the summer of that year. Later in the year, he travelled to China to pursue missionary work. You can see Soper's illustrative style in this pencil sketch for the portrait of Liddell, which we also hold in the NGS collection. The final portrait is loosely painted and depicts the sitter with a more relaxed attitude than the preparatory sketches, but with no less of an acute, direct gaze. For me, these depictions of Liddell radiate as a result of having read about the story of the relationship between artist and sitter in the excellent biography of Liddell by Duncan Hamilton. Soper was a family friend of the Liddells. During the time he sat for this portrait, they took walks together in the countryside. Soper wrote a poem inscribed to E.L., describing how they walked in the hills and how he etched their initials in a tree trunk with a silver key. The poem contains the line, "You wrote that time might spell the letters E and L." Any thoughts of romance were ended when Liddell left for China later that year. But Soper kept this portrait on an easel in her sitting room for more than 60 years, never exhibiting it, The painting was found on her easel when she died in 1990. Their names forever linked in Soper's inscription at the bottom left-hand of the portrait, where they appear complete with middle initials for Eileen Alice Soper and Eric Henry Liddell. In the National Galleries of Scotland 1995 spring newsletter, there was a small report about individuals not represented by a portrait in the collection, and Eric Liddell was one of those mentioned. A newsletter subscriber remembered reading this when she came upon this portrait of Liddell for sale in London in 1995 at the Chris Beatles Gallery, which looks after the estate and copyright of Eileen Soper. She contacted us, and the portrait was bought by the National Galleries of Scotland, I quote, with alacrity. A thank you letter to the eagle-eyed spotter was duly sent, which included the words, "We had despaired of ever getting a likeness of Eric Liddell, so there is much rejoicing here." The portrait was unveiled later in the year in 1995 on the 71st anniversary of Liddell's record-breaking run in Paris at the Portrait Gallery by the then European 400 metres champion, Scottish athlete Melanie Neath, in the presence of Liddell's family. Having mentioned Chariots of Fire, I wanted to end this section with some words from Lord Putnam, the film's director, who I saw speak in Edinburgh a number of years ago. And it was on this occasion he spoke movingly about what he referred to as Liddell's genuine moral courage during the time of his missionary work in China, where he died of a brain tumour in the Waihaisian internment camp in 1945. So sticking with the sport of athletics, the two portraits on the left, acquired by the National Galleries of Scotland in 2004, are by John Lesaw. They were made as studies through a commission for the National Portrait Gallery in London, which you can see here in the middle of the slide, a group portrait of 6 Team GB Paralympic athletes celebrating their gold medal success at the closing ceremony of the Sydney Paralympic Games in 2000, which Lesaw completed in 2004. The athletes depicted are the two sitters in the studies, on the top, sprinter Caroline Innes, and at the bottom, swimmer Maggie McElhenney, and making up the group, Tanni Gray-Thompson, Chris Holmes, Simon Jackson, and Noel Thatcher. Lesaw dedicated this painting to the memory of the neurologist Dr. Ludwig Guttmann, the founder of the Paralympic Games, who he had known whilst a patient in the late 1950s at Stoke Mandeville Hospital. Lesaw had been a wheelchair user since he became paralysed from the waist down in his teens, and he comes from a family of artists. Walter Sickert was his uncle, and his mother, Helen Lesaw, also an artist, was the director of the Beaux-Arts Gallery in London. His process for the group portrait involved making drawings and painted oil studies, such as the studies you see here, to inform the final painting. He travelled around the country to visit each sitter and, in his own words, made dozens of studies of each athlete. It took Lesaw over 2.5 years to carry out the preliminary studies and to complete the final group painting. The third study you see here on the right is again of Maggie McElhenney and is in the collection of the Maclean Museum and Art Gallery in Greenock, where McElhenney was born. Lesaw was due to fly out to Australia to make studies of the Olympic Stadium in Sydney, but in the end had to use photographs of the stadium to paint this element of the composition. He's commented on this way of working. The studies are always working drawings done with a view to painting, not things in themselves. They're information, a way of noting down what you would like to remember when memory just isn't enough. And you can see in the final positioning of the figures in the group painting that Caroline Innes at the top left is standing rather than being depicted in her chair, as she is in the preliminary sketch. And McElhenney at the front has her arms raised, a pose which she's not displaying in the preliminary study. We currently have at the Portrait Gallery Caroline Innes, the portrait of the left, on display, and it was brilliant to be able to get it out on display in time for the Tokyo Paralympics. But if any of you are visiting Edinburgh, the portrait of Chris Hoy and this portrait are on display. Now on to my final example. This is a just smaller than life-size portrait by Humphrey Ocean, commissioned by the National Galleries of Scotland and painted in 1989, of one of the legendary figures in Scottish football, Danny McGrain, born in 1950. He joined Celtic in 1967, the year when they became the first ever British team to win the European Cup. This is a prelude to more than a decade of success for Celtic, to which McGrain made a vital contribution. He stayed with Celtic for 20 years, becoming club captain in 1977 and making 681 appearances for the club. He won 62 caps for Scotland and played in the 1974 and 1982 World Cups. At the height of his achievements, he was regarded as one of the finest fullbacks in the world. The artist Humphrey Ocean was born in Sussex in 1951 and studied art schools in Tunbridge Wells, Brighton and Canterbury. In 1982, he won an earlier iteration of what's now called the BP Portrait Award and went on to establish himself as a leading portrait painter, depicting his sitters in a post-pop art style. Accepting the commission, Ocean wrote, "I would be 100% interested in accepting the commission to paint Danny McGrain's portrait, thrilled even. If I'm not mistaken, with Denis Law and Jim Baxter, McGrain completes the Holy Trinity." Ocean originally planned to have the National Stadium, Hampden Park, as the background for the portrait, but felt it lacked atmosphere without the Tartan army present. As part of the portrait's sittings, Ocean set up a studio in the spare room of McGrain's house in Glasgow and remarked, "As the 6 weeks unfolded, Danny referred to the numerous times he had been portrayed as a footballer, but now he was out of football, he shouldn't really be shown either as a Celtic or a Scotland player. It wasn't going to feel real to be shown as a footballer. I did a drawing of the house, the fence, then a drawing of the whole figure, hence the decision to use a natural background, not one where the figure was collapsed against Hampden. He was dressed in his jumper and, at first, in a pair of grey trousers, but they didn't look right. After work on the jumper, Danny brought out his kilt. It was his wife Lorraine's idea. I felt right away that he looked wonderful. It gave him a kind of warrior look. For me, he immediately looked classy, unusual, and as good as he looked when he played football. Now he had the presence and poise that he had had on the field." For the duration of the portrait sittings, Ocean worked 4 days a week on the portrait, often taking his meals with the McGrains and getting to know them well in the space of creating numerous ink drawings. For some time, he worked in his own studio, improvising without his sitter by setting up McGrain's chosen clothes on a mannequin and making paper cutouts of the figure to ascertain the final positioning. Now you'll notice the frame in the left-hand image. This is an integral part of the painting and was designed by the artist Humphrey Ocean, who described it as a kind of concession to football, considering that on the surface, the portrait doesn't feature a stadium ball or the sitter dressed in a football or outfit. The frame includes at the top and bottom the words Celtic and Scotland spelled out by football studs. And you can see in the 4 corners, again, are football studs arranged in various team formations, with the coloured studs in each case representing McGrain's position in the team. The text alongside the painting here is in Ocean's hand and flags the incorrect arrangement of the stud representing McGrain in the bottom left-hand corner. And these are 2 images of the portrait being unveiled in 1989 with the artist Humphrey Ocean on the left in the left-hand photograph. And I'm not sure that nowadays we would get away with involving the use of a ladder on health and safety grounds. So thank you for listening this morning. I hope this talk has given you a flavour of painted games in the National Galleries of Scotland collection. I'll end with this last image, a lyrical evocation of summer, just when we're coming to the time of year when the clocks go back, painted in 1912 by Edinburgh artist Cecile Walton, which depicts fellow artists Walton's husband, Eric Robertson, and their friend Mary Newbury in the gardens of the Walton family's rented summer house, the Old Vicarage in Wenhaston, Suffolk. Looking at the style of clothes worn by Eric Newbury here, perhaps he's relaxing after a game of lawn tennis. Thank you again for listening and happy to take any questions now.
Thank you very much, Imogen. You lived up to your billing of giving us a good look at the range of pictures in the National Galleries of Scotland, and thank you for that. I got sensed in your talking an enthusiasm for sport. Where does that come from, and do you still play?
Oh gosh. Yes, so I mentioned briefly in my talk an exhibition that we put on at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery in 2011. This was a sporting exhibition called Playing for Scotland, the Making of Modern Sport, and looked at a number of paintings in the collection, tried to explore geographically how sport had developed across Scotland throughout the 19th century. And it was from there really that the bug with sporting art started. And I suppose the foundation for that was my love of sporting heritage and history anyway, and my, well, school and university career playing sport. But the last sport I regularly played was cricket, actually. I was part of the winning team that won the 2013 Women's Scottish Cricket Cup, but that now, gosh, that's almost 10 years ago. So yes.
Well, that's a good memory anyway. You mentioned there were 1,000 pictures in the Scottish galleries of sporting art pictures. What is the collecting policy of the galleries, and are you still actively looking to add to the collection?
Yes, absolutely. I mentioned that the National Galleries of Scotland is made up of 3 physical galleries, but we really refer to the collection as one collection across those 3 galleries. So some of the works I've shown here in the beginning slides, the Peploe and the Peter Howson work, are actually works that are more usually shown at the Gallery of Modern Art rather than at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery. So I would very much say that as part of our collecting policy for the one collection, and specifically for the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, we would be looking to actively still acquire works relating to sporting heritage. The Golfers usually hangs at the Scottish National Portrait Gallery, but would be equally at home hanging at the Scottish National Gallery. So we have that flexibility actually and luxury of a large collection covering a chronological span and a subject span.
I mean, one of the questions or one of the points I've got here is Deirdre Tanner saying she would like to visit the galleries up in Edinburgh following the talk. Just an announcement on our part, and something that we haven't made public up until now. We're planning a Munnings exhibition next year, which will open in London on the 26th of April. It'll move to Newmarket, but after that, we plan to go to Edinburgh in the new gallery that James Harvey is opening. And I think we would then like to be able to visit you, Imogen,
Yes.
and ask you to show some of our members around the sporting art collections, if you would be willing.
Yes, I'd be delighted to. I can't wait for that. There will be a good number of related artworks on display, probably across the 3 sites in Edinburgh, but we also have a building where we store the artworks which aren't on display, our Granton Art Centre, and I'm sure we could include a visit to that facility if, for example, for whatever reason, the Golfers or the Grand Match by Lees are not on display. And we've done that before, so I'm sure that would be possible. I'd look forward to that.
You've made it even more exciting and inviting. Thank you. One question I think here from, unique from somebody you mentioned in the talk, Hugh Dan McLennan.
Yes.
He was asking, obviously a keen interest in the Shinty paintings. Do you have any from or by Charles Lees in the collections?
Of representing
Shinty in particular?
By Lees, no. No, but I am actually currently talking about Charles Lees. I was contacted by a member of the public who has a family connection to curling. I think her grandfather represented Britain in the Winter Olympics in the 1920s, and she's inherited a large curling collection, which includes, we think, a small curling painting by Charles Lees. So I'm trying to work out at the moment how that might be related to his larger Grand Match painting. But Shinty, no, I haven't seen any representations by Lees of Shinty. But again, as I said in the talk, Lees was sort of moved from depicting single individuals in portraits to large sporting scenes. So there may well be something out there, but I haven't come across any references as yet.
You mentioned in your talk about the Highland landscape with a game of shinty.
Yes.
And that you discovered that by asking the public where it might be. Are there any other pictures that you're looking for that you'd be looking for the public to help find?
Yes, there will be. So the BSAT would be the perfect forum, I suppose, to come to put the feelers out. There is a rugby painting, I think, that would be great to find out the whereabouts. I will look into that, Tim, and if that's okay, I will send you the details to see if we can get something going.
Yes, we'd love to work with you on those sorts of projects.
Great. Great. Well, it turned out that the shinty painting was actually in the same family as it was in the 60s, but because members of that family had got married, changed their names, the clues which led to the family whose collection it was in the 1960s has sort of faded out. So in effect, I had to begin again researching where the painting might be. So we came up trumps with that one.
Just a note, Hugh Dan has thanked you for your comments and thinks there's a new Holy Shinty Grail that we should be looking for. Pictures by Charles Lee.
Hugh Dan is multitasking because he was just this morning introducing the second day of the Sporting Heritage Conference. So thank you for coming to hear me speak.
One of the thoughts I had was, knowing that you're involved with the Sports Heritage Network and working on the Lord Aberdare Prize with the British Society of Sports History, are you seeking to closer links between the academic world and the galleries and sporting pictures?
Yes, absolutely. I would very much like to concentrate my own personal research efforts on this topic. What it would be within this topic, I don't know, but obviously it would have some relation to sport and art. One of the National Galleries of Scotland key responsibilities is to carry out research on the collection. And sometimes a lot of these paintings were acquired for either the sitters or the artist to be represented in the collection rather than wholly the subject. So the painting that I've ended the talk on here, this is really a wonderful example of the work of the Edinburgh-based artist Cecile Walton, but not much research has been done into the fact that actually I think Eric Robertson here is represented as if he's just come off the tennis court. So yes, a lot to be done and a lot of sporting elements and history to be drawn out of all of these artworks.
I think this should be the final question. A lot of the work of the BSAT concentrates on field sports, traditional sports.
Yeah.
And I note that you didn't include the Monarch of the Glen or any of those traditional images of Scotland. Is there a particular reason for that?
Yes, I wanted to concentrate this morning on perhaps some of, as I said at the beginning, some of the lesser known sporting artworks, and also to show the scope. That's not to say in any sporting exhibition we wouldn't be displaying the Monarch of the Glen or any of the other more traditional sporting art pieces we have in the collection, of which we have many. So maybe that's a part two talk, Tim.
That's a good way of getting into that.
There's one, of course, there is one that I missed out on purpose again, the Skating Minister. I know if you type into Google skating in art, that's the first painting that comes up on the Google search page. So of course, again, I didn't talk today about that wonderful, very small painting, but very memorable painting by Raeburn. What
riches you have that you can leave them out.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Imogen, for your time and for the effort you put into giving us this talk today. I think from the comments we've had, everybody's been pleased with what you've been able to describe for us and show for us. This lecture for everybody has been recorded and will be put on YouTube, and you can access it through, and previous lectures, you can access it through the BSAT website.